Hey guys, it's Libby. Settle in, because we're gonna be here for a very, very long April wrap-up. So in the month of April, I got through 27 works of literature. They were 12 novels, 6 novellas, 2 novelettes, 2 short stories, 3 plays, 1 audiobook, and 1 book that got DNF'd. You may remember that I only got through 2 things in March, so this was a nice turnaround and a nice catch up on my Goodreads goal. I'm now more than halfway done with my goal of 70 books. And also this month I read more than I read in January, February, and March combined, and tripled. So yeah, successful reading month for me, which will now mean a very long wrap-up video. Fortunately, in many cases, I will be able to direct you elsewhere for my thoughts, but not in all cases, so let's just go ahead and get started. So the first many things that I read were a bunch of historical romance novels. I decided to do a romance binge after my unsuccessful March, so that I could get a bunch of books read and get back into the habit of reading, because romance novels, oh man, they are like candy. And in most cases, I read multiple works by the same author, so I will start by discussing the author's general strengths and weaknesses, and then you can just assume that those comments apply to all of the books, unless I say otherwise. So we're gonna start with Jennifer Ashley and her Mackenzies and McBrides series. I read the first book in this series, The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie, a couple of years ago during my last big romance binge, and I thought it was quite good, so I decided to continue on with the series. It's about 4 brothers, Ian and then his 4 older brothers, all getting hooked up, and then one of the brides of these brothers has a couple of brothers of her own who also need to get hooked up. So we spend several books doing that, and there's a couple other family members who can't be left all alone. So Jennifer Ashley as a writer, one thing that really stuck out to me was how like realistic her characters were. So she's writing in the 1880s. I'm sorry, her books are set in the 1880s. She is not writing in the 1880s. 80s and early 90s. And one thing that you often find in historical romance is that the characters feel more like modern people cosplaying as historical characters. Like they still have totally modern thought processes, not just about like, you know, race, class, and sexuality, but about like what sort of expectations do you have of a relationship and that sort of thing. But Jennifer Ashley actually writes quite historically believable characters. On the negative side, her novels tend to have 2 plot lines going on. The A plot, which is the romance and like when they gonna start smooching, when they gonna get married, when they gonna confess their love, sort of plot. And then there's like a sort of thriller type plot going on of, you know, mystery, whodunit, who's gonna murder, who's threatening to murder our main character's sort of story. And I found that one of these was often done better than the other. It kind of changed which one. So, you know, I feel like maybe amongst the however many 10 books or something that I read by her, we had like 5 good books if you had just like matched up the plots in different ways. And then the other problem that I had with this series was actually the character of Ian, who is our hero in Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie. So I really liked Ian in his own book, and I thought he was such a drag in everybody else's books. So Ian is autistic, but in the 1880s, this word does not exist. So like you can't have a character just say, you know, this is my brother, he's autistic, and then we move on. There always has to be a scene in which it is revealed that he is autistic. 1, so that whoever this new lady being introduced to the family is knows about it, and 2, so that if you haven't read the first book, you like know what's going on. So that got a bit boring like the 8th time I was reading like someone explaining to me that a man is autistic when I already know that he's autistic. And also, the part that I really didn't like was that in every book there is what I call the Ian scene. So even if Ian has like nothing to do with the plot, there will be a scene in which he shows up and tells one of our lovers in this book that it's very important that they express their love or stay together or something. And it just felt a little bit like autistic people are magic, and like, I have bad news, America. Autistic people are not magic. They do not know who your soulmate is. So I found that weird. Like, I understand why we needed to have the Ian scenes when we're doing the books about his brothers, because, you know, getting introduced to your future brother-in-law that's not weird. But I don't know why Ian was in the books where, like, his relationship to the main characters is, like, love interests, sister's husband's brother. Like, why does Ian need to show up for these? And also, one of the most common characteristics of autistic people is that they are bad at reading social cues, and like, this is part of Ian's autism, as we learn in the book about him. And so, like, Ian should be the last person to realize that these two people are, like, secretly in love and actually need to be together. It was just very strange, and I started skimming the Ian scenes by the time we got later in the books. So let's move on to the first book that I actually read this year, which is the second in the series, Lady Isabella's Scandalous Marriage. When I talk about these romance novels, I will do my best to see how well I can remember the main characters' names. I don't think it'll be a problem for this first group because they all show up in each other's novels, but when we get to some of the later ones, oh boy. So this is about Isabella and Mac, which is short for Roland, or not short for Roland, but his legal name is Roland, but that's weird, so everyone just calls him Mac Mackenzie. They have been married before the beginning of this book. They ran away at her coming out ball and got married, and then they lived together for a couple of years and then had a falling out, and in this book they get back together. I think the A-plot of this novel had a lot of potential. Mac and Isabella are both very interesting people, and they have this whole history, and like, a bunch of shit has gone down in their marriage, and you know, I wanted to hear about that. But the B-plot was really dragging it down, because sometimes instead of like hearing about their relationship, we had to hear about this like art the heist scandal thing. Mac is a painter, and Isabella realizes, you know, right before the book begins, that someone else is copying his art style and selling off art, saying that it is a genuine Mac Mackenzie when it's a fake. And this plotline was not particularly good and was distracting from the juiciness, so I feel like we could have just cut it entirely and just had it be about our two leads. Oh well. 3 stars. The next one was The Many Sins of Lord Cameron, which is about Cameron and Ainsley Douglas. Oh god, I wish I could move to Scotland and have a friend named Ainsley. Although no one with that name would want to be my friend, because I would say her name like that all of the time. So this one, I felt like it should have been better than it was. Like, at every point that I was reading it, I was sort of anticipating that like the next paragraph would do this interesting thing that I had in mind, and then it just never did. So when we first meet them, Ainsley is a respectable widow who is in the employ of the Queen, and the Queen has asked her to nab some incriminating letters, and Ainsley suspects that they are in Cameron's room, so she is rifling around through his stuff in his bedroom, and he walks in and he's like, "Can I help you, madam?" Let the sexiness ensue. Now, this one did not have a very strong B-plot. All of the like thrillery elements were blended into the romance story better than they were in Lady Isabella's Scandalous Marriage. However, I was just not as interested in the love story as I feel that I could have been with some small tweaks. Also, consent is not at a premium in this one. They do this thing where, you know, Ainsley and Cameron will find themselves alone in a room, and he will begin undressing her and also himself, and she's like, no, and it's unclear whether she's like, no, I'm afraid someone might walk into the room, we can't be doing this right now, but like rain check, or if she's just like, no, I don't want to be getting naked with you. that was something I needed to have clarified. I did really like Cameron's teenage son by his first wife, Daniel, though. He was great. Anytime Daniel was in a scene, you knew it was going to be a good scene. This book I also want to bring up for the first time, what is up with Jennifer Ashley's publishers? Because like they keep choosing for her not good covers and titles. So we started off with The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie, and I'm just like, what are we focusing on with that title? Like, he's autistic. Is this really what we want to call this book? And with this one, The Many Sins of Lord Cameron, I'm like, he was raped and beaten by his wife. Is this the angle we want to take on this? Okay. And then also some anthropology of romance novel covers. In the Anglophone worlds, you tend to get 3 sorts of romance novel covers with people on them. I'm not including the ones that are just like a bouquet or a ring. So you get a woman by herself, which signals, a strong, independent woman making her way in the world, doing stuff with a coquettish eyebrow. Then you have a man and a woman, like, gazing fondly at each other while their clothing falls off. Well, I say gazing fondly. It's probably gazing lustfully at each other while their clothing falls off. Which signals, like, passion and powerful love. That's what's going to be in here. And then there is the man by himself, and generally it's only like piece of a man by himself. In this case, abs. There's going to be a lot of abs in the upcoming covers. Either apologies or you're welcome, however you want to take it. And this means like raw sex. Come and get it, ladies. Which I think is actually kind of a mischaracterization of most of Jennifer Ashley's books. They're not really about the raw sex. So if you come in expecting like Highland boinking, there isn't that much Highland boinking. Anyway, this one also got 3 stars. And then we move on to the last story about one of the actual Mackenzie brothers, and that is The Duke's Perfect Wife, which is about Hart, H-A-R-T, like the deer, and Eleanor. Hart is the Duke of Kilmorgan and also is richer than God, and in this story he is sort of positioning himself to become prime minister. Eleanor had been engaged to him many years ago, but she called it off, and now she's living in genteel poverty with her father. One thing that I think was interesting in Jennifer Ashley's approach to the series is that she starts with the youngest brother and then moves up in age order until we get to the oldest. And also we're moving forward in time by like a couple months to a year between each novel. So by the time you get to Hart, you have like fairly old romance, people who are old for being romance heroes and heroines. Hart's like 40 and Eleanor's like 35 or 36. This is another one where the B plot is kind of dragging down the A plot a bit with like Hart's political machinations, and I'm like, just make out with your beautiful Eleanor, please. And then when we get to the end, like there's I don't know. I was reading it on Kindle, so it's hard to tell, like 20 pages of just plot stops. Nothing happens. And I was like, The other thing that I realized with this book is that Jennifer Ashley is not comfortable writing kink. And I feel like there's maybe some pressure on romance novelists nowadays to be like cool and modern and like include a BDSM angle, but like show that it's cool. And I think this was a failed attempt to do that. So Hart is into bondage. If that scares you, all of the bondage depicted in this book was quite light, but Ashley was really unclear about what tone she wanted to bring to this. So like on the one hand, she'll talk about it as like his dark desires. And on the other hand, to talk about it as like a loving expression of love. And I'm like, you can take either tack, but when you blend the two, it's like, what is happening? What are you saying? So that didn't work out great. I gave this one 3 stars. Okay, now we are moving outside of the world of the 4 Mackenzie brothers and going to the Untamed Mackenzie. Now, I basically cannot tell you anything about this book without spoiling Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie for you, so this will be quite a quick review. This was a novella. And this was the first one since Madness of Lord and Mackenzie, where I think the A plot and the B plot like were both good and worked really well together. Our heroine gets framed for a murder that she didn't commit, and this like layers in very nicely with the love story. This I think is also the first one where neither of the main characters gets like grievously injured in the last quarter of the book. In all the other ones, someone gets like shot or stabbed or nearly trampled by horses, and it's like, Jesus, being involved with the Mackenzie family is just a death warrant. But here, no one was actually seriously harmed. That was good. So yeah, I definitely like this one better, and I gave it 4 stars. Then we sort of jump forward in time several years to do the Wicked Deeds of Daniel McKenzie, which is about Daniel, Cameron's son from his first marriage, who's now like 21. And his romantic interest is it Violet? Yes, it's Violet. So Violet is a like fake medium. She pretends to talk to the dead, and Daniel goes to investigate this, and they end up smooching. Unfortunately, this made very little impression on me. I really enjoyed reading about Daniel in books where he was a side character. He's kind of the opposite of Ian. I really liked Ian in his own book, and I hate him in everybody else's book. I really like Daniel in everybody else's book, but I just cannot muster up the strength to care about him in his own book. Again, we have Jennifer Ashley being uncomfortable with kink. I think she knew that she didn't do a very good job with it in The Duke's Perfect Wife, and so she like backed off a bit, which means there was only like sort of 2 sentences, which are just like thoughts that float through someone's head, and it's like, wait, what is that? Are we? No, we're not. Okay, I don't know why that happened then. And also there's just this there's a yikes scene. So Violet is doing like palm reading at a party, and in order to look the part, she disguises herself as a gypsy with like the scarves, and she like paints her skin to look darker. Yikes. And there is, I would have been so much more down with it if there had just been like 1 sentence of like, I don't like doing this, I think this is silly, but this is what people expect. And so we have that scene at the party, and then this leads into the first time they have sex. And like, so while I'm reading this romantic, sexy scene, like occasionally you'll hear about like her makeup getting smeared, and I'm like, no, don't remind me. So yeah, that was a thing. It did contain a scene of ballooning though, which is new and different. I gave this one 2 stars. Okay, now we're moving out of the expanded Mackenzie family and hopping over to the McBride family. I think Jennifer Ashley got tired of writing books about people who were like ungodly wealthy, because the Mackenzies are, and so decided to write about some heroes with jobs. So here we have the McBrides, who are the 3 brothers of Ainsley. The first book, which is the first book, The Seduction of Elliot McBride, is the first one. So Elliot is our man, and our woman is named, oh boy, Julieta? Let's check. Juliana. I was close. So this book had a great opening scene. Juliana is in her wedding dress. She's supposed to get married to this guy whose name I have forgotten. Surprise, he is not Elliot. He is not showing up at the church, and as it turns out, the day before he had run away with like his niece's piano teacher, and they're married now. So Juliana goes into like a outbuilding, like a side chapel, to process, and almost sits on Elliot McBride, and they were like childhood sweethearts, and she's like, oh my god, my fiance has just jilted me for a piano teacher, and I'm in this wedding dress and I've got the church. And Elliot's like, I'll marry you. And they're like, nah, okay. And I thought this was super great. And then nothing happens for 300 pages. There is kind of a B plot based on like Elliot had served in the army in India, and he was like captured and like had a lot of trauma from that. And there was like another guy, I don't even remember, who like betrayed him into being captured in India, and he's like maybe back, and we don't know what to do about this, and blah blah blah. I didn't care. I didn't really feel like it was like the book was slow going. I just felt like I got to the end and I was like, wow, nothing happened. So I wasn't particularly bored while I was reading it. There was just not a lot of content. So you've got this like kind of what B plot, and then with the A plot, the love story, like they are already both in love with each other and married by chapter 1. So like we don't really have an arc to go through, because you know either you need to have them like fall in love with each other and that's your arc, or you need to have them they can fall in love with each other early, but then like they can't be together, and so we have to solve that problem. That's the arc, and she opted for neither one, which means there is no love story in this romance novel, which is not great. So 2 stars. Then we moved on to Scandal and the Duchess, which is a novella, and our main characters are Stephen and Rose. So Rose is something of a scandalous widow. She married a man who was much older than her. She did actually like him. They actually liked each other, but he died 3 weeks into their marriage. He had a son from a previous wife who has inherited everything and is really terrible to Rose. So Rose is currently like living in the spare room of her carriage driver. And one day when she is going home, Stephen, who has gotten drunk, basically falls on top of her, and so she takes him home and cleans him up, and romance ensues. I was slightly heartened after the Seduction of Eliot McBride that this was a novella, because it meant that like it was okay that there was less stuff happening because there was less stuff for space to happen in, but I feel like the amount of stuff that happened also shrank. So this one should have been like a short story, because there's this like search for Rose to find the secret inheritance that her first husband left her, and whatever, I didn't care. 2 stars. Okay, so then I only had 1 book left in the series, or at least in this section of the series. Jennifer Ashley has since like gone back to the 1740s to talk about like ancestors of the Mackenzies, but this is the last one of the Victorian Mackenzies. You may have noticed that I've been kind of down on most of the books in this series, so imagine my shock when I totally loved this one. It's called Rules for a Proper Governess. I have no trouble remembering our main characters' names. They are Sinclair and Bertie. So Sinclair McBride is a Queen's Counsel. He's a very highly placed lawyer, and in the first scene he gets off one of Bertie's friends who had been accused of, I think it was murder, and shows that it is one of, there was this other guy who did the murder who is a friend of Bertie's father and fiance. Bertie is a Cockney pickpocket, and her dad tells her to go steal something off of this lawyer guy who got his pal in prison, and she's like, I mean, he did do it though. Dad's like, go steal something. So she goes and nabs his watch, which was the last thing that his late wife gave him. So he runs off and it does some dumb things. But eventually he does make it back home to his 2 very poorly behaved children who have scared off another governess. Fortunately, Bertie quite liked Sinclair and stalks him back to his house a little bit. And one day she sees his kids out with the latest governess, who they scare off again. And then Bertie's like, why don't we just hang out and go get some tea? And so she takes care of the kids for one day and then comes back, and Sinclair's like, what are you doing at my house and with my children? You stole my stuff. actually, do you want to be a governess? Because I can't get anybody else to keep the job. This was so great. Like, it almost feels like there wasn't even a B plot because it was just very well integrated in with the A plot. I also know that writing children in romance novels is hard because they tend to be like annoying, or you use them at the beginning to get the people together and then you just drop the child. I'm looking at you, Charlotte Bronte. But I really liked the kids in this one. They were totally part of it. They were interesting characters, even though they're like 7 and 10. And yeah, this book was great. I rated it 4.5 stars. If you want to read this book series, my recommended reading order, which will lead to like mild amounts of confusion about who all the characters are, but I would say go for Madness of Eliot Mackenzie, then Untamed Mackenzie, then Rules for a Proper Governess, and at that point you'll have met all of the other characters, and so just pick whichever ones you like and read about them. Okay, then we had a brief pause in romance reading for Dewey's 24-hour readathon. I decided to not read any romance novels during this because I didn't want to read digital copies, and all of my romance novels are digital. So I finished off a book that I had started earlier, which was The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim. I had read this before, but I do not think I read it in April, so obviously we had to remedy that. This is a classic from the mid-20th century. Is it from the 1920s? It's set in the 1920s. I can't remember if it's from then or slightly later. But it's about these 4 women who are like stuck in a rainy London, and they just sort of dream of how nice it would be to go to a sunny Italy. This is one of these books where like English people fetishize Italy. And so then they go and they rent a castle, and there is a garden and wisteria, and it's all very lovely, and they find themselves, and they learn to be friends with each other, and they learn to love their husbands again if they have them, and literally Italy will solve all of your problems. This is a very cute book. I feel like if you know anything about gardening, you will enjoy this more than I do, because there's a lot of description of the flowers, and I'm just like, oh, it's a flower paragraph, going to skip. But this is like just so very cute and nice and twee. I give it like 3.5 stars. Okay, then I picked up the Autobiography of Henry VIII with Notes by His Fool Will Somers by Margaret George. This is 932 pages, so yes, this is the book that I DNF'd this month. If I had attempted to finish it, I would not have finished probably anything else that I read this month. So this is about Henry VIII and his life, and is told in first person, and oh God, is it boring. And I did not want to be bored for 932 pages, especially with fiction. Like, I feel like this had all of the downsides of nonfiction and none of the upsides. So downsides are the like drier tone, no offense, nonfiction, but you can get away with a drier tone in nonfiction than in fiction. But none of the like historical reliability. Like, I can't read this and then be like, oh, I definitely know lots of facts about Henry VIII now, because I'll be like, what if they just made that up? So if I was going to read 900 pages about Henry VIII and be bored by it, I would at least want it to be nonfiction. So I got 50 pages in and then decided I can do better things with my life, like read more romance novels. Okay, let's move back to those. I picked up 2 books by Sarah MacLean. I had read one Sarah MacLean book a couple years ago. It was A Scot in the Dark, which is a pretty solid title. I did not actually particularly like the book, though. I thought it would have been better suited to be a novella than a novel, because there was just not enough plot. So Sarah MacLean writes Regency and 1830s. I don't... The first one was definitely 1830s. I think the second one I read was Regency. The main thing I have to say about her books is that it seems like what she does is she writes about 75% of the novel, and then she says, okay, given what has happened so far, what is the cheesiest way possible that events could wrap up? and then she just writes that. So I tend to find myself like fairly well enjoying the story, and then as we approach the end, I'm just like, oh my god. I mean, I get that this is a romance novel, but please, this is just too sappy for belief. Okay, so we've got Day of the Duchess, which is the third book in a series to which Scott in the Dark is the second book. I have not read the first book, so whatever. This sort of thing tends to not particularly matter in romance novels. So who are our main characters? Okay, so we've got Sarah, S-E-R-A, short for Seraphina, and a duke, what's his name? Malcolm Bevingstoke, Duke of Haven. I feel like he gets called Haven. So this is another, like, people were married, had a falling out, and now fall back in love with each other type of plot. I feel like there is not anything more to say about it than that, and the fact that it's unbearably cheesy. So let's move on to another good title, 9 Rules to Break When Romancing a Rake. Do I remember the main characters' names? I feel like she's got a kind of poetic name, like Cassandra or Persephone, or what's her name? No memory of what his name is. I'm pretty sure he gets called by his title as well. Calpurnia, okay, Roman, not a Greek, and she goes by Callie. And what's his name? Gabriel St. John, Marquis of Ralston. Okay. That sounds about correct. So Callie is like at the advanced age of 28 or something. She's accepted that she's not going to get married, and she's just like, okay, fuck it. She makes a list of 9 things that you're not supposed to do if you're a proper lady, and she's going to do them anyway. So she wants to like fight in a duel and go drink whiskey in a bar and fence, and through one thing and another, the Marquis is constantly encountering her when he's doing these things, and he's like, are you sure you're okay? Because like sometimes you're doing actually stupid, dangerous things. So you know, we just sort of play our way through the list, and then at the end, it's unbelievably cheesy. 2 stars. I think I am done with Sarah MacLean now. I try not to dismiss romance novels after 1 book because, as you can see with the Mackenzie series, sometimes, you know, an author has written several books that are not particularly to your taste, but then they have 1 or 2 that's like, oh my god, so good. But since I'm having the same problem with all of Sarah MacLean, I think it's safe to say that I can stop. So then I moved on to some Courtney Milan, who writes not just Regency. The first book I read from her was set in the 1860s. It is called After the Wedding, and my god, does her publisher give her terrible, terrible covers. It's very, like, awkwardly blocked together in Photoshop, and Courtney Milan is, like, a really popular romance novelist. Like, I feel like we can spend the money to make her books look like not crap. Or is this like a 1960 BBC thing where like whoever is selling the best gets a budget cut because obviously they don't need it because like people will buy Courtney even if they don't like the cover? Is that what's happening? So my main general thought about Courtney Milan is that in all 3 of her books that I have read, there's always one of the characters who has been like totally beaten down by society and like nothing good has ever happened to them in their entire life, which is just a bummer to read about. Like, you know, I'm fine with people being sad in romance novels sometimes, but really nothing good has happened to you in your entire life? Okay. See, this is part of what made Rules for a Proper Governess so good. Sinclair and Bertie are both like totally normal, functional people who are not at death's door or for any reason, and they just happen to fall in love with each other, and it's fine. It's the world's not gonna end if they don't fall in love with each other. Anyway, After the Wedding. So we've got is her name also Callie? I feel like it starts with a C. Camilla. We've got Camilla and Adrian. So Adrian is the son of the daughter of an earl and a black abolitionist. And his mother obviously had to separate from her family when she married a black man. And so Adrian sort of works for his uncle, his mother's brother, but he cannot acknowledge that he is actually his nephew. So he gets sent off to do a spying mission for one of his uncle's rivals in the church. And while there, he meets one of the maids, Camilla, who is the daughter of an earl, but has separated from her family and is, now working as a maid on half pay. So it's not great. Adrian's spying gets discovered, and he is forced to marry Camilla. I don't totally remember why all of this happens, but it's like tricky, and I'm afraid I might get into spoilers, so let's just say that they end up being married to each other. And Kourtney Milan actually has a law degree, so a lot of this story circles around the fact that if you've been forced to be married against your will, it's not a real marriage, and you can get an annulment as long as you do not present to anyone that, as long as you don't put out the fact that you are married. You have to not introduce yourself as husband and wife. You have to not spend the nights together. Good Lord. And so, obviously potential for oodles of sexual tension. Interestingly, in this book, both characters had what I will very judgmentally call a normal amount of libido. Normally, in romance novels, people just their skin brushes and they melt into a quivering mass of sexual desire, which, is mostly not true. So, these two were able to have their hands brushed without melting into a quivering mass. And so that was interesting to read about and a pleasant, refreshing moment. Yeah, I just wish that everything about Camilla had been less of a bummer. 3 stars. Then I read Mrs. Martin's Incomparable Adventure, which is about a side character from the last one, from After the Wedding. So this is very interesting in that it is not only a lesbian romance, but it is a geriatric lesbian romance. Our heroines are 73 and 69 years old. Mrs. Martin's first name is Beatrice, and her romantic interest is, I think her name is supposed to be pronounced Violetta. Her parents are French, but she's been raised in England, which means that her name should be Violette, but I guess they've anglicized it to Violetta, but I think of Violetta as an Italian name, and I'm not totally sure how to pronounce it. It might be Violetta. I'm not sure. Beatrice has a terrible nephew who is just a shitty person in all of the ways a mid-19th century man can be a shitty person, and he is living in the boarding house, which is sort of stewarded by Violetta. Violetta has also just lost her job as the sort of housekeeper of this boarding house, a year before her pension was going to kick in, and now she's well, I need to get some money. So she decides to go con Beatrice into saying, because one of the problems with this nephew is that he hasn't been paying his rent. So she goes to Beatrice and says, your nephew has not been paying his rent, and presents herself as the owner of the boarding house so that she can collect this money and then be off. Things do not work out quite as simply as Violetta was hoping. Beatrice ends up going back to London and trying to talk to her nephew, and then they basically play a bunch of pranks on her nephew, putting geese in his rooms. It's very strange. So since this was my first lesbian romance novel, I wanted it to be really good, but it was actually kind of weird. Mainly tonally, the tone was strange because they're playing these pranks, which on the one hand, tonally weird, and on the other hand, is this actually supposed to work? What are we doing? And also because Violetta, I think maybe a line that nothing good has ever happened to her in her entire life. And so that was, a bummer. So I gave this one 2.5 stars. Okay, last Kourtney Milan was Proof by Seduction, which has the main characters Gareth and Jenny. I did it. Okay, so this was Kourtney Milan's debut novel. And this is also the first debut romance novel I have ever read. And it went about the way you would have expected. So clearly, Kourtney Milan had like been planning to enter the romance arena, and she'd like written all of these like interesting scenes and come up with all these interesting scenarios that would work great in a romance novel. And then she gets her first book contract and she just shoves all of her ideas into one book. The pacing was off and so many things happen. Like by the end of chapter 2, I'm like, why are you guys kissing? You've had like 3 conversations which have told you that you do not like each other. What's with the kissing? So I think this book really would have been improved if we had taken about 60% of the material in the second half of the book and just turned that into a different book, and then take the rest of the material and like scooch everything down a little bit to make the first 30 pages take 100 pages, and then reset everything in the second half. This did have quite an interesting premise though. So Jenny works as a fortune teller and does not even use blackface, which is great. And she does feel kind of ethically squiffy about this, but she literally has no other way to make money. And one of her clients, Ned, was like suicidal when he came to her, and she justifies doing what she does for a living by saying that like I'm actually making his life better, even if it's based on lies. So Gareth is Ned's cousin. He's the Duke or the Marquis of I don't know which thing, and he hears about this and he's like, Ned, you can't be going to a fucking fortune teller. It's very scientific. So he goes along, and his plan is to prove that she's a fraud. Unfortunately, she is like the sexiest thing that he has ever seen in his life, and he's like, oh my god, what do I have to do to be around her more, but also prove that she is a charlatan. So yeah, basically too much stuff. I had whiplash trying to keep track of like what Jenny and Gareth thought of each other. Definitely a debut novel. I gave it 2 stars. Then, oh my god, have we finally reached it? It is the final romance novel, and it was a Tessa Dare. I think it is safe to say that Tessa Dare is my favorite romance novelist. She's so great. I've read all of her Castles Ever After series and all of her Spindle Cove series, but this is the first book in a new series called Girl Meets Duke, and this one is called The Duchess Steele, and the main characters are Emma, and his first name is George, but there's actually lots of discussion about what we should call him. And Ash is what most people call him, which is short for Ashbury, which is his title. I like Tessa Dare because she has a sense of humor about her work. She does like address serious topics, but generally in a kind of over the top, like this is all still like fun way. So it's kind of cartoony, so I can understand why some people would not like her work, but I actually think she threads the needle very well. So we have quite a Baroque plot in this one. So Emma is a seamstress. She's living in London, and she has not gotten paid for her last commission, which was to make a wedding dress for this woman who is marrying the Duke of Ashbury. However, the wedding gets called off at the last minute, and now she has this dress which she is not being paid for, and she has like written letters and she can't get anyone to pay for it. So eventually she decides it's a very hideous wedding dress. So eventually she decides she is going to go to the Duke of Ashbury dressed in this wedding dress and be like, pay for this already. She has bloody perfect timing because he has just been thinking, he was like practically writing a letter to his solicitor saying like, I need to marry anyone, because if I don't, my title and my estate will go to my cousin who sucks, so I need to have a baby. And then this woman in a wedding dress walks in and he's like, get married? Now, the reason that this wedding was called off is that Ash was horribly burned at the Battle of Waterloo, and he has like scar tissue down like half of his body. And he's like, oh God, no woman could love me. It's amazing. Actually, to be fair, at the beginning I was like, seriously? And then by a quarter of the way through, I was 100% on board. So Emma decides that being a duchess sounds way better than being a dressmaker and decides to marry him, but there are some rules. They cannot like see each other any time during the day, and they only see each other at night whilst doing the baby making process with all of the lights turned off. And once she is pregnant, she leaves and they never talk to each other again. Surely, as this is a romance novel, it will go exactly like that with no variation. I really enjoyed this. I think the one technical flaw was that obviously Ash's personal arc is like very tied up in his relationship with Emma, but Emma's personal arc is actually like about her relationship with her father, and like she's exploring it through things that are happening with her friend, and Ash isn't really part of her personal arc. So by the time you get to the end with like so the way most romance novels work is like they fall in love slowly, and then it seems like everything's going to be good, and then there's a twist, and then they have to like prove that they will actually love each other forever in the last couple chapters. So the like twist towards the end for her didn't really have to do with their relationship, and so that was a little bit unsatisfying, but I still like this, and I gave it 4 stars. And if you want a good place to start with historical romance, Tessa is not bad. This book is also not bad. Okay, phew. I may have to do this video in 2 sittings because my camera's almost out of battery, but we can skip most of the next ones because then I had Torathon, and David and I did a separate review video for Torathon as we were reading the short stories, so I'll just tell you what I read. I read The Only Harmless Great Thing by Brooke Bolander, Rogue Protocol and Exit Strategy by Martha Wells, The Story of Caillou by Peter S. Beagle, Faster Gun by Elizabeth Bear, The Martian in the Wood by Stephen Baxter, and The Girl Who Sang Rose Matter, also by Elizabeth Bear. Then I read 3 Shakespeare plays. One of them was for the Bard Book Club, which is Henry IV Part 2. This is Part 1. It's one of these. Here we go, Henry IV Part 2, so Bard Book Club video forthcoming about that. And then I read 2 other Shakespeare plays because like someone had commented on one of my old Bard Book Club videos. I think it was for Much Ado About Nothing. And so I got a little alert to go check on that. And then as I was reading the comments, the video started playing. So I listened to the video and I was like, damn, this chick is smart. Because I've like forgotten most of what I said in my earlier Bard Book Club videos. So I went and I rewatched most of those. And then I had to reread some of the plays. So I reread Taming of the Shrew and Much Ado About Nothing. And one of the great things about the Bard Book Club is that now, instead of having to explain all of my thoughts about these plays in like 3 minutes in a wrap-up video at the end of the month, I can just point you to the 40 minutes that I spent talking about it in Bard Book Club. So links below if you want to hear me talk about those plays. And then last book. It's by Thomas Hardy. I have only one Hardy left, that is The Trumpet Major, because now I have read A Pair of Blue Eyes. This is one of Hardy's lesser-known works. It's one of the romances and fantasies, and for some reason I went into it feeling like I wouldn't like it that much. I was wrong. I actually really, I ended up quite liking it. The plot is, I really like the plot. It's easy to spoil, so I won't talk too much about it, but it's a fairly conventional love triangle. Hardy is very restrained. We do not have a complex love polygon with 4, 5, 6 people. It's pretty much just the 3 of them. We've got this young woman named Elfriede, or Elfrida. I'm not sure if we go with the English or the German pronunciation there, who is a vicar's daughter, and she falls in love with a young man, but it turns out he is like not socially acceptable to her dad, so like they're gonna have to marry in secret, but this is Hardy, so you know something's gonna go wrong, and then oh lord, things happen. I'm pretty sure that this is taking place on the South Coast near Thorncombe Beacon and the Golden Cap, which is where I did like a walking tour a couple of years ago. I'll leave a link to footage of that below as well. So it was very nice to read a book set in a place that I have been. Although I am glad that I went first and read the book second, because you do a lot of like walking along cliff tops when you are walking the South Coast Trail, as I did. And in this book, someone like kind of falls off one of the cliffs, and we're generally not sure if they're going to die or not, because it's all very perilous for several hours. So that may have scared me off of actually walking on them. But if you actually go walk on them, it's quite safe. You're not close to it. They must have been being kind of dumb. Now, I do have to say, the ending I did not love. It felt kind of cheap and like, eh. As we were getting into the closing chapters, I was like, oh no, I feel like something dumb is gonna happen, and then it did. And this is, me saying this genuinely means something, because I know a lot of people don't like the ending of The Woodlanders or Two on a Tower. I really like both of those endings. Well, I really like the ending of The Woodlanders, and I like ending of Two on a Tower. I'm not totally sure that I really like it. And then this is the other Thomas Hardy, where the end is kind of what? So yeah, that wasn't so good. So I give it 4 stars. And I have only 1 Hardy left, not including the poetry and short stories. So I still have lots of Hardy left. Who am I kidding? Okay. Oh my God. Now I am done with the video. I'm gonna go lie down.